Welcome to TeachMeAuto.com. In this video, we're going to show you how to replace the rack and pinion steering system on this 2001 GMC Sierra 1500.
The problem that this owner had with this vehicle was that on the passenger side, the inner tie rod where it goes up into the rack and pinion, it had a lot of excessive play in it, so the wheel was loose when you would move it. Now, normally you can just replace the inner tie rod. However, there were also a lot of leaks from some of the bad seals and whatnot, so we're going to go ahead and replace the entire rack and pinion on this vehicle.
So now we're going to go over the tools you'll need to do this job correctly.
Let's go.
Jack and two jack stands. We will need two wheel chocks just like this one. We're going to need a new rack and pinion steering system, and this one comes with the inner tie rod ends already on. We also bought two new outer tie rod ends. We need a catch pan to catch the power steering fluid. We need a ratchet with a 7/8 socket to remove the lug nuts. We'll need a 15mm socket and ratchet to remove the splash shield bolts. And we'll also need an 18mm socket and ratchet for the outer tie rod end nuts. We'll need a screwdriver. Always wear safety glasses. We'll need a shop light. And we'll need a pin to mark the relationship from the steering shaft to the steering gear. A pickle fork to remove the tie rod ends. We need a rope or a bungee cord to secure the steering wheel. We'll need some power steering fluid. An 18mm line wrench to remove the power steering lines. 16th socket and ratchet to remove the pinch bolt on the steering shaft. Some channel locks to hold the washer nut on the stabilizer bar link, and a 13mm socket and ratchet to turn the stabilizer bar link bolt, and a 10mm wrench for the stabilizer bar bracket bolts. A 15/16 socket and ratchet and a 15/16 open-end wrench to remove the rack and pinion bolts. A 13mm wrench to remove the rack and pinion ground strap, and a pair of pliers to bend the cotter pins on the outer tie rod ends, 8mm wrench or socket and ratchet for the grease fittings on the outer tie rod end, and a grease gun. Before we jack the vehicle, we need to set the emergency brake, put the wheel chocks behind both rear tires. Then we'll remove the center caps and break the lug nuts loose on both front wheels. Lug nuts are loose on both front wheels. We're going to go ahead and jack the vehicle up. We need to slide our jack stands into place under the frame and lower the vehicle onto the jack stands. Now we're going to go ahead and finish removing the front tires. We're going to remove the wheels, and we'll slide them up under the truck. This is both to get them out of the way and for safety reasons in case the vehicle happens to fall. Repeat this on the other side. Now we're going to use our 15mm socket and ratchet and remove the 5 bolts on the splash shield. When all the bolts are removed, we'll slide the splash guard out of the way. Now we'll go under the hood and we'll mark the relationship between the steering gear and the steering shaft. Tie the steering wheel up. This will prevent the steering wheel from turning and damaging sensitive electronics inside the steering column. We're going to use a 7/16 socket and ratchet or wrench to remove the pinch bolt. Once the pinch bolt is removed, we can slide the steering shaft off the steering gear. We move to the passenger side where we take a 22 millimeter wrench and break loose the jam nut on the outer tie rod. Now we're going to use an 18 millimeter socket to remove the nut from the outer tie rod end. This is what connects the tie rod end to the knuckle. Now we're going to insert a pickle fork between the tie rod end and the knuckle. We'll hit it with a hammer, and this should pry the tie rod end out of the knuckle. When removing the outer tie rod, count the number of turns it takes to remove it, then screw the new tie rod in using the same number of turns. Ours was 17 turns. Now we're going to go to the driver's side and break loose the jam nut from the outer tie rod end, and do the exact same thing we did on the passenger side. The driver's side outer tie rod end was a little more stubborn, so we had to use a hammer to hit the bottom of it to force it out of the knuckle. If you're going to reuse the outer tie rod ends, be careful. Outer tie rod end, we need to count the number of turns it takes to remove it. This will allow us to screw the new one in the same number of turns, so the alignment will be pretty close. On the driver's side, we had 24 turns. Now we're going to put a catch pan under the front of the vehicle to catch any power steering fluid that's going to leak out. Now we're going to use our line wrench to break loose the power steering lines. Now we're going to remove them by hand. Once we have the lines removed, make sure you tuck them up out of the way so they won't get damaged. We're going to place our channel locks on top and hold the fastener that the link stabilizer bolt screws into. And we'll turn the bolt head on the bottom using our 13 millimeter ratchet and socket. You just want to loosen this up enough so we can drop the stabilizer out of the way so we can access some bolts on the rack and pinion steering gear. Now we'll move over to the passenger side and do the exact same thing. Channel locks on top and a 13 millimeter socket and ratchet on the bottom. Now we're going to use our 10 millimeter socket and ratchet to remove the bolts holding the stabilizer bar brackets. Once we have the brackets removed, we can drop the stabilizer bar down and out of the way. We're going to use our 13 millimeter socket to remove the grounding strap that connects the cross member to the steering unit. Then we're going to use our 15/16 socket and ratchet and the box end wrench to remove the bolts holding the rack and pinion steering system in place. The nut is removed from the back, we can pull our bolts out. You may need to twist them back and forth to get them to come out. Once you remove the last bolt, there's nothing else holding the rack and pinion to the vehicle, so you need to be ready to catch it or have a partner under there helping you. With the rack and pinion system out and on the floor, we'll transfer our grounding strap to the new system. Getting ready to install the new rack and pinion in the truck, we need to remove the caps. Now your rack and pinion system should have came with 2 new O-rings. These O-rings install on the power steering lines on the truck. Remove the old one and install the new one. Remember to do this to both lines. We're ready to install our new rack and pinion. Line it up and reinsert your bolts. Put your nuts on the back. Remember to torque these to 136 foot-pounds. Now we're going to reinstall our grounding strap back to the cross member using our 13mm socket. Then we're going to lift our stabilizer bar back into place and reinstall the bolts in the stabilizer mounting bracket. These are 10mm. To torque these to 24 foot-pounds. Then we're going to tighten up our link stabilizer bolts. Again, hold the washer on top with the channel locks and torque the bolt to 48 foot-pounds. We're going to connect our power steering lines to the rack and pinion system. And we'll tighten the lines down with our 18mm line wrench. Now it's time to reinstall the steering shaft to the steering gear. Reinstall your pinch bolt and torque to 33 foot-pounds. Remove the jam nuts from the old rack and pinion and install it on the new one before you put your outer tie rod ends on. And if you screw the outer tie rod ends, remember the number of turns it took to take it off from earlier. This is our passenger side, and we had 17 turns. The correct number of turns, tighten up your jam nut by hand. Slide the outer tie rod end through the knuckle and install the nut on the bottom. Now this is now a 19mm. The new ones were 19, the old ones were 18. And torque these to 33 foot-pounds. Now install your new cotter pin and use the pliers to bend the ends around so it won't come loose. Then we're going to install the grease fitting in the outer tie rod ends and tighten it up using an 8mm ratchet and socket. Then we're going to use our 22mm wrench to tighten the jam nut. We'll move to the driver's side, reinstall our jam nut. We install our outer tie rod end, and we used 24 turns on the driver's side. Install the nut on the bottom of the outer tie rod end. Tighten it up against the knuckle using a 19mm wrench. Tightening to 33 foot-pounds, we reinstall our cotter pin. Remember to bend the ends so it doesn't come loose. Then we're going to install our grease fitting. Tighten up with our 8mm wrench. And tighten up our jam nut with our 22mm wrench. Now we need to add grease to the outer tie rod end. Be careful not to put too much grease and break the seal. You can kind of feel the sides of the seal and tell how much grease is in there. Check it after about a week of driving. You may need to add more grease. Next, we're going to install our splash shield. We reinstall the 5 bolts. We'll tighten these up using a 15mm ratchet and socket. The last thing we're going to need to do is to bleed the power steering. Before we can do that, we need to remount the tires and lower the truck back on the ground. With the truck back on the ground, we'll torque our lug nuts to 140 foot-pounds. Don't forget to remove your wheel chocks. Now we need to put fresh power steering fluid back into our power steering system. Fill it up until it's at the code full mark on the dipstick. The code full mark is the lower mark on the dipstick. Once it's full, crank the vehicle up. Let it run for a few minutes. Recheck the power steering fluid, and again make sure it's at the code full mark. If not, add some more fluid. Now it's time to bleed our system. If you're in a garage, make sure you open the garage door and back the vehicle out a little bit so carbon monoxide won't build up in there. But to bleed the brakes, you turn your vehicle's wheels side to side, but don't go to the full stops. Periodically check your fluid, make sure it's topped off.
Well, we hope this video will help you change the rack and pinion in your 2001 GMC Sierra 1500.
While it sounds like a difficult job, it's really not that bad. It'll take the average person probably about 4 to 6 hours.
That's taking breaks and stuff, so you shouldn't have any trouble with it. Now, we're getting your comments that you're sending us. We appreciate that. Please keep them coming. You know, our goal is to offer you a video that'll help you in the best possible way we can. So we do appreciate your feedback, and we encourage you to keep sending those comments. Comments at teachmeauto.com.
As always, thank you for visiting teachmeauto.com and have a great day.